Welcome back again to Solving Basketball. This is our first off-season episode. Going to try to get it going again on a fairly consistent basis here in the off-season. And today's guest, our first guest, is Stephen Gentry. He's an assistant coach at Illinois. Before that, he was director of operations at Gonzaga. And he's also spent time at Oklahoma State, Stephen F. Austin, Texas A&M, and the Miami Heat. Stephen, thank you very much for your time coming on here. I hope you and your family are healthy and safe.
Yeah, all is well in Champaign. Thanks for having me on, Jordan.
What we're going to talk about on this episode and what we were messaging about a little bit through email is the scheme and style changes that you guys had at Illinois this year and how that impacted what was a really, really good year for you guys. But the first question of the podcast, before we get into that, for every guest that I have on, is if we walked into a gym right now and you went to the free throw line, I went under the hoop, and you shot 100 free throws in a row, how many would you make out of 100?
Ooh, wow, that's a tough one. I pride myself. I didn't miss a single free throw in college, so I was 7 for 7. But I'd say 82. 82 out of 100.
82 out of 100. Okay, so I always do a little research, and you were a walk-on at Gonzaga, is that correct?
That's correct, yep.
Okay, so I went on the basketball reference page, which you have one, and it had you at 2 for 2. So where are the other 5 coming from?
Well, that doesn't include exhibition games.
There we go.
Yeah. Todd Golden would probably beat me, though, in a free throw game, so... Todd would foul me on purpose and put me at the line. So,
gotcha. Yeah, it is that is a tough act to follow. I think Todd Golden and John Shire are the two highest that we've had on, but they did not shoot 100% from the line in college. So you have been beaten.
I know. Yeah.
What is basketball? What is this basketball? Is that basketball? What is basketball?
What that always transitions into, the free throws question, is kind of like your playing background and how you got into coaching. We don't go too deep on the biographical side of things, more about the on-court stuff that we're going to talk about. But when you were a player, were you always thinking of a coaching career and getting into that type of thing?
I was, and I wasn't highly recruited by any means, coming out of a small town out of Kansas, but I always wanted to go to a situation that would put me in the best possible spot to be a coach. And I felt like that was at Gonzaga, and decided to walk on there and just learned so much from being around great players, obviously a tremendous staff and Coach Few. And I kind of always thought of myself as a player coach. I wasn't playing much. I was at the end of the bench, and so I kind of was always seeing the game through the lens of a coach, and just kind of learning the game, being around such an incredible program.
From there, out of college, your first job was it with the Heat or was it with Texas A&M?
It was with the Heat, yeah. So right out of college, got a video intern spot with some connections through Eric Spoelstra, and what an incredible experience for me. I learned so much about how to work, how to prepare. Obviously just being around that culture every single day, it was just an incredible opportunity for me, to cut my teeth, right out of college, and also just get a completely different perspective on the game. Going from college to NBA, and the Miami Heat. I think is is one of the best cultures in the NBA, and is so big on preparation and analytics and player development that it was just, I couldn't have asked for a better opportunity right out of college, just to learn the business and learn how to prepare.
Well, you mentioned analytics, so let's start on that for a little bit. As a player, were you interested in the statistical side of things, or was that Heat experience your first step forward with it?
I got a little bit of a taste of it at Gonzaga. The director of operations at the time, Jerry Krause, was big into OER and DER, kind of ahead of its time a little bit. But then got the full experience in Miami, and Miami has a culture of you can't just give a suggestion, right? Like you have to have, if you're going to give a suggestion and put your neck out there, you have to have it backed up with data. And even more importantly, you had to have worked really, really hard and done your homework on that data. And I remember one of my first days, on the job, Spoke came down into my office, and this is just the type of culture it was. He was like, hey, Dwayne Wade and Shaq are getting into this argument about which state produces the most NFL draft picks, whether it's Florida or Texas. Do some research on the last 5 NFL drafts and get me an answer. And obviously that had nothing to do with basketball, but that was the culture there, that there was no stone unturned. You had to do your prep, you had to do your work, and if you're going to offer up a suggestion, it better be backed up with some data and some work. And so for me, that was a great learning tool. And then I took that with me to Texas A&M. And, my first job in college was a video coordinator with Mark Turgeon there. I had a great 4-year run there, but it was an opportunity for me as a young coach, to have a seat at the table. I was in those offices with, obviously Coach Turgeon, but, a really good staff that had been around the block and had years and years of experience. I didn't have that quite yet. And so analytics and video, and obviously, my experiences at Gonzaga playing helped as well, but that allowed me to have a voice, to where I could say, yeah, hey, I don't have decades of experience to go off of, but hey, what about this data, or what about this video clip? And it allowed me to have a voice early on in my career.
Your first time around working for Brad Underwood, so you were at both Stephen F. Austin and at Oklahoma State. I'm curious to get your opinion on this, but I would say that those teams were some of the most extreme in the country stylistically. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, we were total pressure at Stephen F. Austin, up the line, in the line. We were one of the top turnover teams in the entire country, forced turnovers in the entire country. We played really, really small. But yeah, I mean, we just really pressured the basketball and we just went all in with, playing up the line, in the line, and not letting teams be comfortable and running their actions. And we obviously took that system with us to Oklahoma State as well. But then we had to make a big decision. We actually started out Big 12 play 0-6. And that year we had one of the best offenses in the entire country. We actually ended up with the top OER in the entire country. So we were a really, really good offensive team, but our defense was just not getting it done. And we were giving up layups. We were fouling. Our best players were getting in foul trouble and having to be on the bench. And so we had to make a big decision, to switch to more of a pack line defense. And, just that subtle change, got us into the NCAA tournament. We went on a big run. I think we won 9 of 10 games, which in the Big 12 that year was an incredible run. It was a very good league that year, very strong, and were able to get into the NCAA tournament and actually lost in a tight game to Michigan in the first round. But that was probably what I learned the most was, you can look at all of these numbers, right? Like turnover percentage, defensive rebound percentage, foul rate, blah, 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 blah. But, and I got this from Coach Few, the most important stat is winning, And so as a coach and a staff, you've got to analyze those numbers to put your team in the best possible position to win games. And simply what we were doing at Oklahoma State just wasn't working. And especially again in that league that year, there were so many good point guards and ball handlers that, hey, we needed to make some changes, to help our team and program put them in the best position to actually win games.
So ideally at that point in time, from a recruiting perspective, were you trying to, and this even at Stephen F. Austin as well, Was it on the front end? You knew that you're going to be playing this pressure deny style on the line, up the line, like you said, and trying to find players to best maximize that, or did it emerge from who you recruited?
No, it was that was our system, and then we recruited to it. But it was, I mean, it was a tough system to recruit to because on the defensive end, you're pressuring the ball. You're playing in the passing lanes. You've got to play incredibly hard, right? I mean, you've got to be all in with that system. But then at the other end, we were pretty cerebral and ran the spread pinch post offense. So we needed guys that could pass and handle and make decisions. So it was tough to find kind of that perfect player that fit. And, I mean, looking back on it, Thomas Walkup, who ended up being an All-American for us, is kind of the ideal player for that system. I mean, Ty Charles was another one that was good for that. TJ Holyfield, who ended up transferring to Texas Tech later in his career. So it was tough because, hey, you needed a kid that was motored up, willing to sit down and guard and pressure and be in the passing lanes, but yet on the other side of the court, be able to pass, handle, shoot, and think the game. And so I think probably the best thing we found were players that could play multiple positions. We got really positionless there at Stephen F. Austin because 1 through 5, you needed to be able to sit down and guard the ball. 1 through 5, you needed to be able to deny. And then at the other end, offensively, 1 through 4, you needed to be able to cut, pass, shoot, handle the ball. And so it was a very unique system to have to go out and find players that were best in that.
When using that system, specifically on the defensive end, I wanted to ask you about what scouting other teams was like. So when I was at New Mexico State, we actually played Illinois. It was in Underwood's first season, so you weren't there at the time. And from anecdotally, I can tell you that, we had like a 50 or so play man-to-man playbook. And for that game, we basically decided going to find 5 that we feel like we can run against the pressure that don't rely on too many ball reversals or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. We probably put in 2 or 3 new plays that were completely new. You could probably imagine backdoors and things like that.
Yes.
And then we threw out the other 45 for that game.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, having scouted, what's that like on the flip side of things, knowing that teams are going to change so much?
Yeah, I think scouting-wise, you first really focused on what type of entries teams were doing because we wanted to blow up and take away those entries. So, hey, were they a dribble handoff entry team? Were they a wing entry, an elbow entry, a ball screen oriented entry team? And really focusing on what maybe the common theme was in terms of entries. But also you had to then, hey, teams aren't going to try to run all this stuff, right? I mean, they're smart and they see. And so, hey, focusing on, how are they alleviating pressure? Is it with wing back doors? Is it with flat middle ball screens? So getting really good at those. So it wasn't, to me, the best way to prepare for games defensively with that system, because it is so robust, is just making sure your system is tight. And so, and I didn't really learn that until probably my second year at Stephen F. Austin was, hey, there's no need to go over Sam Houston State's 10 plays. They're probably going to run 1 or 2 of them, but just be really tight with your principles and your system, and then just hope that that your system wins out. But I mean, there were some funny situations, and we played Northern Iowa, and I think Ben Jacobson's one of the best offensive coaches in the country. He had a vast playbook. I mean, one of the bigger ones I've seen, right up there with Matt Painter at Purdue and McDermott when he was at Iowa State and still at Creighton. I mean, huge playbook, right? He totally scrapped all of his plays and went to literally an old school 4-out with 2 players at half court, 2 players in the dunker spots, and then went 1-on-1 for the entire game. I mean, just went all in with, hey, we're not going to try to run anything. We're just going to play 1-on-1 from the top. And then, hey, they do a quick little dribble handoff and then let someone else go 1-on-1. And It was one of the few times where we actually had to adjust in game and not pressure, and get in the gaps a little bit more, and we actually ended up losing in a tight game there to Northern Iowa. But yeah, it was a little bit different to scout with.
The one thing that is certainly clear about pressure deny is that it changes the way your opponents play, just like you said with the Ben Jacobson game plan. And at Stephen F. Austin, that was obviously a net positive. You guys won NCAA tournament games, you won conference championships, and then, like you mentioned, again at Oklahoma State, and now something similar happened this season at Illinois, turning more to pack line. It hasn't translated as much. And so I'm curious, I guess, your thoughts on why, and also maybe if we flash forward to this season, when that decision was made going into this year to, I guess, dial down the pressure a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think why it maybe doesn't work as effective at the high major level. I mean, there's so many good ball handlers at this level. I mean, the game is getting smaller. I mean, there's some of these foremen that handle and drive and can pass just as good as some of these point guards. And, so I think right there, going up against teams that have really good ball handlers and have multiple ball handlers, makes it really, really tough. And, and that was probably the biggest thing was going into our year here. I was just hired in late August, and they had actually gone on a foreign tour, and played, with the pressure. And I think Brad was teetering a little bit, of whether or not to do it or not. And I had kind of two main points. It was like, Brad, look at what your record is against high major teams playing that way, and that's the most important stat. Was yes, you are a high turnover rate team, but is that equating to winning? And specifically, is that equating to winning at the high major level? And the answer is no. 0-6, at Oklahoma State with it, and then 14-18 in year one. And hey, they took over a program and had to revamp the roster and so forth. But then 12-21 with it as well. And I think if you play pressure, hey, yeah, it's going to help you maybe beat some of these low major teams by more. But hey, we're in a league here, the Big Ten, where you're playing 20 league games. And so what system is going to best help you win, in your league? And the numbers were just, they didn't back that up. But I think what Brad needed was, okay, you don't think that is the right way to play, but what's the alternative? And I think that's probably the best thing with me coming back on board was I had an alternative. And that was a good lesson for me as a young coach. If you're going to give your head coach a suggestion, hey, coach, we need to change our high ball screen package, you better have a solution. And again, that kind of goes back to the Miami thinking, right? Like, you better have a plan. And again, you better have that backed up with data, because it's one thing to say, hey, this isn't working. And it's another to say, hey, not only is this not working, but here's a good solution, and here is a plan. And so, yeah, so we just went in, started installing more of a pack line, defense, starting with our fall workouts, and, started just chipping away on it. But even then we had to make, some big changes throughout the year. We still picked up the ball at half court, still tried to kind of pressure, and we just felt like we were getting overextended and teams were ball screening us too high with Kofi Coburn. And, we had to bring our pickup point way back to the NBA line. So it wasn't an aha moment where we decided to go, pack line, and we won immediately. I mean, it was a rough process, just teaching a completely new system, completely new terminology. And we tried to do all that in a short amount of time. Most teams would probably install that in the spring and then have the summer and the fall. And I mean, we tried to do all that starting in September, and obviously credit to our players being able to adapt.
For the listeners who are unaware, this season you guys finished 304th in turnover rate. So you turned opponents over on 16.6% of possessions. In Coach Underwood's career, he was at 23.2% in total coming into this season. And then the most immediate or the most obvious improvement was keeping teams off the foul line. So in free throw rate this season, you were 20th in the NCAA. And
like if you look at our kind of key defensive stats, I mean, it's a total flip, going from, like you said, 304th in turnover rate. Well, it was like, I think 4th and 24 the 2 years prior.
Mm-hmm.
But with that turnover, they were giving up a record high effective field goal percentage, and we were one of the worst foul rate teams. And so it was interesting, by just that, defensive change, the numbers just flipped. I mean, the turnovers flipped from being the highest to one of the lowest, but then our free throw rate, from one of the worst to the best. I think we saw probably the biggest improvement was just on the glass. And being, I think we were like 80th in defensive rebounding. But hey, the prior years, it was like in the 300s. So that was probably the biggest area we saw. Was it put us in a better position, to defensive rebound and stay between, the offense and the rim. And so if you think about all that, you're taking away now, you're protecting better against layups, fouls, and offensive rebounds, right? Some of the easiest, scoring opportunities in the game. So that was a big emphasis of, hey, we're limiting, easier opportunities for the offense.
How about ball screen coverage? How did that change from what they did the year before at Illinois to this season?
Yeah, they had a couple different plans. They saw a lot of high flat middle ball screens, again, as kind of a pressure release. And so they tried to do, some hard showing and some weaking. Probably the biggest area we had to adjust with that was just because of Kofi Coburn.
Mm-hmm.
So many teams tried to bring him out of the paint as a shot blocker, and put him in middle ball screens. So we did a lot of, and we call them veers, just kind of flat shows, just keeping Kofi between the ball handler and the basket, and not letting the roll, getting by him or getting below him, and then kind of making it a 2-on-2 game, there in those ball screens. So that was kind of our middle ball screen plan. And then on the wings, we kind of was a version of Texas Tech. We had already been a no middle team, even with the pressure, even though we didn't give up a lot of wing catches. So we kind of kept that same philosophy there in terms of being, our nose on the top hip of the ball handler and forcing the ball to the baseline. And so we iced on all wing ball screens.
I did a video early in the season of several teams that were icing more and more. Kansas was a big one Bill Self iced for the first time this year. You guys had the switch.
Baylor.
Oh yeah, Baylor, exactly. I could be off here. You would know much better than me on this, but I definitely felt like one of the biggest growth areas defensively, even throughout the season, was Kofi Coburn, who you mentioned, teams putting him in a lot of ball screens, really improving as that ice, being able to drop back and keep the guy in front.
Yeah, he really did. I mean, and it was because everyone tried to do it, right? And so
Reps.
He just got so much great game experience. I mean, every game people were trying to attack him. And obviously he was getting reps and film work away from the games. But yeah, I mean, I just think that game experience and getting so many reps of being in ball screens, you're right. I mean, he made a huge jump in terms of positioning and angles, and which was a big part of our defensive improvement.
So maybe the last thing on the defensive side, the part of me that has to play devil's advocate here to be positive about the pressure system is that two of the coaches in the same coaching tree as Brad Underwood, Bob Huggins and Frank Martin, have been at high major programs. And obviously Frank Martin went to a Final Four at South Carolina. Bob Huggins had a really strong 4-year run with the Press Virginia. I don't think that the defensive systems are identical to what you guys did at Stephen F. Austin or at other places, but they're similar in nature, the forced turnovers and kind of an indifference to fouling. Another team or coach that's not necessarily in that tree, but I think he's probably one of the better high major pressure defense programs and coaches is Leonard Hamilton at Florida State. So was there any thought to tweaking things, but kind of keeping the overall identity, maybe not quite as aggressive with denial, but still being denial as opposed to pack line?
Well, and you bring up the word identity. Like, to me, your defensive system doesn't determine your identity. Whether you're a pack line team or a pressure team, we always want to play hard, right? And we always want to be tough. And so those are identity things. And so that was one of the other things we had to kind of get over was, are we being quote unquote soft by not pressuring? It's like, no, we're always going to be tough. We're always going to be physical. We're always going to play hard. We're just going about it a different way. And you're right. I mean, there's tons of ways to skin a cat, right? But I think if you are going to pressure, you have to go all in with it. And Huggs and Frank have certainly done that. And maybe they give up some concessions on the offensive end because of that, because of the personnel it demands to play that way. But I think those two coaches, I mean, they're obviously highly, highly successful. But I would say they are all in with how they play. But again, I think there is probably some give and take, and I think they would even admit that. Gosh, if I have to play this guy that's going to be able to press full court and dive into the ball, I might be giving up something at the other end, offensively. But again, I think they think over the course of time, that they're just going to wear you down, and that's just what they do. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly different ways to win games, certainly different systems. But I think what I learned from is you have to be all in with the pressure, and again, have some concessions on the other end of the ball.
No, that's a great point. It's something that I've written about. I totally agree, and I think that with the pressure, you've mentioned a couple times that ultimately winning is what matters, not so much, like the 4 factors that we've been talking about: turnovers, rebounds, free throws, and shooting. It only matters to the extent that it affects winning. I would say, that's what points per possession, or what you've called OER and DER, are really good at. Points per possession is agnostic to what style you're playing. You can have a good points per possession regardless of style. The other point that you made about having to play with the pressure and with a certain personnel to pressure does change who you are offensively. And, I guess the way that Huggins and West Virginia have mitigated that a little bit is by offensive rebounding, which that kind of correlates.
Yeah.
Players that can pressure and players that can offensive rebound.
Well, and I think, too, with those pressure systems, you are getting easy opportunities off of those steals, and off of those turnovers. But if you run into a team that takes pretty good care of the ball, that's taking away a big part of your offense. Just because I think West Virginia and South Carolina, they are dependent on those easy opportunities, those steals to layups, dunks, those putbacks. And so, yeah, I mean, you've got to kind of weigh those choices in your mind and go forward with whatever system you're most comfortable with. And I think that's too. I mean, I think those systems reflect the personalities of Coach Huggins and Coach Martin. And I think you always have to coach towards your personality. And I think those systems fit, how those guys are wired.
So let's switch over to the offensive end. And my perception of Illinois this year was that the offensive changes, you've mentioned the spread pinch post system, but that the offensive changes this year were a lot more gradual and not necessarily even in the summer or the fall. More changes in season. Is that right?
It really was. And then I mean, I think, I've been in college basketball now, I think, for 14 years. I don't think I've ever been a part of a team that has kind of made as many adjustments and tweaks throughout a season. And obviously we just talked about, the defensive side of the ball, and that was a pretty big, drastic change. But yeah, I would say more of our offensive ones were kind of more in phases. And one of the first things that we changed was our secondary break. When we were at Oklahoma State, we had, again, the number one OER in the entire country. In transition, we ran an open post. And we actually had our 5-man take the ball out on makes and kept the paint open, for pitch ahead layups, for drag ball screens, and playing more, 5 out. Now that we had Kofi on our staff, or on our team, we wanted to go more of a rim run, based secondary. And so instead of having Kofi take it out on makes, no, we're having him rim run and kind of operate more in the middle third of the court with that rim run and with our point guards. And so that was a change, but one that worked well. I mean, we ended up being in the 97th percentile in transition offense according to Synergy. We averaged 20 points a game under 7 seconds or less. That's a key stat that we track after every single game. And so that was one we made, from the get-go, of just adjusting from a 5-out transition to a rim run based transition.
That makes sense. And so from there, from that first phase to the second phase, you were starting the season with a lot of the spread and the pinch post. I'm curious how we've talked a lot about him, Kofi Coburn, but was he again thought of when making some changes, or someone like Ayo Dosunmu and Trent Frazier? I know you went to some more ball screen looks as the season progressed. Was it for them?
Yeah, it was really a combination of things. The first was, again, kind of going back to the key stat, was winning. And, we had a loss at Missouri where we just didn't really feel comfortable with our offense. Didn't play well. We only scored 56 points. It was our last game going into Christmas break, and we just didn't feel like our offense was in a very good spot. And, we started to look at the data. We use fast stats to track our offensive efficiency play calling. And just looking through it, we didn't have a base. We didn't have anything that we were really, really good at. And in that search to become good at something offensively, we were trying to do way too much. And so the first choice was, hey, we've got to simplify our offense. We're trying to do way too much. And running a new defense took up a lot of practice time. And then, hey, trying to just do too much offensively, was being ineffective. So that was the choice we made after Christmas break, was, hey, we're going to really simplify what we do. We're going to pick, 10 set plays and become really, really good at those sets. But the other change we made was, yes, we moved Ayo Dosunmu from point guard to off the ball. But yet he was still our best offensive threat. So we had to kind of redesign a lot of our ball screen actions with him starting off the ball. And that kind of just got into what ended up being some of our better offense, was what I call just mass movement, to where there was a lot of movement going into the ball screen. And then Ayo would have the ball on a ball screen, and there'd still be movement going on. And that became effective also in Big Ten play, because it's such a pack line, hard tag oriented, defense. And we weren't a great shooting team as is. So we felt like, hey, we've got to move these pieces all around and then, hit him with scoring actions. And then with that said, we got further and further away from spread. We were turning the ball over just at an alarming rate early in the year, which was affecting our transition defense. And yeah, by the time we got into Big Ten play, we were getting further away from spread and more into a ball screen continuity look.
We'll talk about the ball screen and the mass movement stuff that you called it, but to stick with the spread for a second, I'm curious your thoughts on pinch post, particularly with like a true 5-man like you guys had. I remember watching the Arizona game early on when you guys played at Arizona, and clearly on all the pinch post stuff, which for listeners who aren't familiar with that term, in the spread offense, there's a first cutter and a second cutter, and then the ball gets reversed, and usually it's the 5-man comes up to the elbow area for either a ball screen or a dribble handoff, or there's several different actions out of it. And what Arizona was doing in that game was really just like flooding that side completely. A lot of teams could sag off on Kofi Coburn when he didn't have the ball, and then when he got the ball, it was kind of flooding to that side, flooding to the handoff. And so I'm wondering, being an analytical guy into the stats, the pinch post is from the triangle offense. When 2s and 3s were thought of in a different way as they are now, has there been some back and forth, I guess, on basically the fit of the pinch post with the given spacing in today's game?
I mean, I'm still a big fan of spread, and I think you can run it in today's game. And again, going back to Oklahoma State just 3 years ago.
Yep, number one.
Where we ran spread a lot. We had the number one offensive efficiency in the entire country. So it can be done. Probably it was just not a great mix with the personnel. I mean, we were playing really, really big early in the year with Kofi at the 5 and Georgie Bashanis-Vili at the 4. And then we had some other wings, that weren't great shooters. And so there were just a lot of positions where the defense could really, really collapse. And to your point, really load up, to the ball and made it more and more difficult, to score. So, I mean, I think it can be ran with a 5-man like Kofi, but just maybe needs a little bit more shooting around him. Or you can run it kind of back into our Stephen F. Austin days. We had a skilled 5. Our best shooter was Jacob Parker, who was a 6'6" 5-man. And we didn't have a ton of shooting around him, but he could shoot there in the pinch post. So it can work at this level. I just think the pieces the pieces have to fit pretty darn well.
Yep, that is a good point. Again, Oklahoma State, when you guys were there, was number one in adjusted offensive efficiency. Yeah, so let's switch gears to the mass movement stuff. Can you explain that a little bit more in detail, I guess? And what is the idea there to basically loosen up the defense?
Yeah, in theory, just kind of to, not make it as easy for defenses to load up to the ball and tag so easily, and really messing with other teams' tag guy. It's really easy to tag on Kofi rolling to the rim if that person is in the same spot every single time, or if that person is stationary. And so we felt like, hey, if we can move the pieces and make the defense move with a little bit of false movement, and then, hey, have a ball screen happen and still have those pieces moving, it makes it harder, for that defense to help on the rolls or, to load up to the ball. And then so we had a lot of plays that had different looks for that tag, whether the tag guy was in a roll replace, whether the tag guy was in a high slot, or the tag guy was receiving a pin in on the other side. And so our quote unquote kind of mass movement plays, where there was just a lot of action going on, became some of our better offense. And again, it kind of started just by simply having Io off the ball to start. And it's like, well, gosh, we want him to be in the ball screen. How can we move him around, whether a zipper or starting with a pin down for him into a ball screen or into a handoff. It kind of started like that, but then we just saw so many of these Big Ten teams loading so hard to the ball. They were like, hey, we've got to solve this because we're going to see this night in and night out. And again, we weren't a very good 3-point shooting team, so we had to just move those pieces instead of just being stationary.
On the initial movement, the false action, or you explained a couple of them. One that I tweeted the other day was you start with a stagger screen on the weak side that turns into a ball screen. So let's say on that stagger screen, is there room for a player to make a read and actually use that? Or is the play completely with the end result in mind, with that, I would assume, a ball screen in mind?
Yeah, it's more of the end result. And I think the specific play you're talking about, the guard comes off that stagger and he's running into a ball screen for Io. And we had 2 different plays. One is to flip out of it early. We're really big on, if you watch most of our ball screens, we slip like 90% of them. Very rarely do we actually make physical contact on our screens. And we teach our guards, we teach our bigs, hey, as soon as you see the defense commit 2 defenders to the ball handler, then, hey, slip and get out of it and either, hey, slip out for a 3 or sprint to the rim, for a lob or for a dunk. And then we had a counter to that play that I believe you tweeted out, where then actually the guard sets it and the top big in that stagger turns around and sets a double ball screen. So it's a double ball screen with the guard setting the first one and the big setting the second. And then the big rolls and then the guard fills behind. And again, then it those 2 plays that are very, very similar give the defense a different look in terms of who is responsible for tagging and helping.
And then, so we talked about the rim run, the first phase of the offense. These types of mass movement are the second. What did you guys do late clock? Let's say the play you just described stalls out. Is that a phase 3 or is it still phase 2?
No, I mean, our phase 3 really became our continuity ball screen offense. And that was, the challenge with spread. It's a very tough offense to flow into, right? Mm-hmm. You've got to get the pieces set in a very specific spots. You've got to get your 5-man up at the nail. You've got to get cutters through. So it's really impossible to have spread be your secondary offense to flow into, because then you're facing a lot of late clock situations. So we had our rim run offense, attacking in transition. We had our sets, and then we'd flow into our ball screen continuity. With Kofi up there, either setting a ball screen or ducking in, really, really hard. And he ended up being one of the best ducking guys and best seal drive guys in the entire country. But then, hey, we also had some late clock plays too. Some high ball screens, some slip ball screens. So we definitely had different layers to it. But at the end of the year, what we kind of flowed into after those mass movements was just our ball screen continuity.
And so data-wise or analytics-wise, are you charting, you kind of referenced it, the 3 different phases and then even the plays within each phase?
Yeah, so we after every single game, we chart our play calls and just kind of see, what is working, what is not. And I think that's not only valuable from a game-to-game perspective, but it's really important in like 5 and 10 game chunks. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. After Missouri, we had to decide, okay, hey, we're trying to do too much. Well, again, you've got to have a solution and you've got to have data to back that up. And so what was working, what was not, and what do we want to keep and what do we not want to keep? And that's where I think it's so, interesting that we were in a big staff meeting kind of going over what we wanted to keep and not keep. And one of our coaches was like, well, hey, we've got to keep that play, right? That's one of our best plays. And you look up the data and it's like, no, we're 1 of 12 on that play on the year. It's not working. And hey, maybe it's not working because of, poor execution, but hey, that play is not working. So that's where I think it's so interesting. Sometimes coaches think that this is a good play or that's a good play, and it's like, the data actually says it's not. And again, you can't just be a robot and a computer and go just squarely off of the numbers, but the data of our offensive play calling came in very, very handy at that point of our year, just deciding what to keep and what to not keep and what was worth continuing to work on.
It probably to some extent helps take the emotion out of the decision. Like if it's a particular coach who put in that play or something like that, where the data is or the numbers are more concrete than biases that a coach could be prone to.
Yeah, no question. That was, and hey, that's the credit to Coach Underwood, right? I mean, he had the spread offense was his baby. He ran that way back when he was an assistant at K-State. They'd had a ton of success with it. We had success with it at Oklahoma State, but gosh, it's just not working, right? We're not scoring. We're a high turnover team. We're not winning as many games as we think we should, and the data's telling us it doesn't work. And then that's where Brad's really good, that he's like, okay, we're going to change. And that's where, kind of I come in with, okay, not only are we changing, but here are some possible solutions. Here are some alternatives. And so I think that makes Brad more comfortable and more willing to change because, yes, hey, we have a viable, secondary plan. And then I would say kind of the last adjustment of our offense was, we were not a very good three-point shooting team. I think we were like in the 300s in terms of three-point percentage. And we almost got to this point late in the year, kind of a phase where we actually won 5 of our last 6, where the best thing that we did was drive the ball. And that's what I continue to tell our players was, hey, guys, we just added this really good set play. And they're like, what's it called? I'm like, it's called driving the ball. And out of everything we did, we got just really good at, hey, yeah, you might be open from 3, but let's swallow our pride a little bit. We're not making those shots right now. And so let's get really, really good at driving the ball and what I call go catches, lifting up out of the corner and catching it on the run and driving it or cutting. And so that was kind of the last phase and last adjustment of our offense, was almost swallowing your pride that you're not a very good three-point shooter right now. We're not a great three-point shooting team. Let's get really, really good at driving the ball. And then I found it surprising, we actually started shooting it better from 3, just because there was less pressure on you, to shoot that 3. You had an option to both drive and shoot it. And also we got so many better looks at 3 because we were, driving and kicking. And again, we won 5 of our last 6 games, and I felt really primed to, make a good run in the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament. So you kind of look back all those different phases. I mean, changing the transition offense, simplifying our offense after the Missouri game, getting more mass movement, getting away from spread, doubling down on driving the ball. Again, I don't know if I've been around a team in a particular season that has made so many tweaks and adjustments, not only offensive side, but then, hey, totally changing our defense as well. But then you kind of look back again, like we were talking earlier, it's all about the most important stat, which is winning. We were +9 in wins this year, the biggest turnaround in Power 5. And that's not obviously factoring in what could have possibly been done in the Big Ten tournament or the NCAA tournament.
Right. Well, even as an outsider who didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, but was just watching film, I mean, I will attest to it, some of the most extreme changes, and ultimately why I was so happy to get you on the podcast here. I guess before we go, heading into next season, I know that there's still a ways to go here, but is the system still under constant evaluation, or what can we expect?
I think the details of it, well, the system is always under evaluation, and I always kind of call it the autopsy of the season. Going back and watching the film, looking at the numbers, making decisions, based on who's returning, who's not, your personnel. But I think we're in a really good spot with our base principles. We will definitely keep the pack line defense again, but now that we have more time with it, maybe, hey, we add a post double plan, or have more time to work on an alternative defense like a press or something like that. So I think we're in a good spot with our base defense there, and then even just our base offense, doubling down on this ball screen continuity, doubling down on our mass movements. Hey, yeah, maybe the particulars of those plays change, but I think that's what excites us so much about our team and program moving forward, is that we've got this base now to work from, right? And instead of putting in a new defense in September, or really adjusting your offense throughout the entire season, and which is really hard to do. I mean, there were times where we were revamping our offense, and it's like, well, who do we have coming up on the schedule? It's like, well, hey, we're at Michigan State, we got Purdue at home, and Wisconsin on the road. I mean, it's like you're playing some tough teams. So it's not like hey, you're figuring things out here on the fly, and you got a bunch of cupcakes. I mean, every night in the Big Ten, it's a battle, it's a war. So I think that's what excites us again moving forward, is that we've got our base intact now, and now we can really fine tune the details here in this off season and moving into next season as well.
Well, I look forward to watching it next season, and I really appreciate you taking the time to give us some of the behind the scenes on all of that. Thank you very much, Steve.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jordan. Great talking.
No hand checking Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Tony Kukoc.